For my chapter reflection, I went back to the book The Beginning of Everything by Robin Schneider, and I looked at chapter 11. And I decided to use the lens of characters' thoughts. I really wanted to pay attention to the main character's thoughts because looking at that particular detail can tell a reader a lot about character development, and it can tell a reader a lot about some of the big ideas in the book. So that's a really good lens to use, character thought, and I notice a lot of you have been trying to use that lens, so I thought that I would pick the same one just to show you how I do it. And so I started reading, and I had my pen in hand because I own this book and I can underline. So just as I was reading along, I underlined. Anytime I noticed the character thinking about something, I underlined it. And to tell you the truth, I got about halfway through the chapter and I realized that I had stopped kind of paying attention to that. And I had to think, oh, I'm supposed to be looking for character's thoughts. So I had to reread a little bit to make sure that I hadn't missed any thoughts. So it's just a natural part of reading to kind of pick up speed and go faster and just read to take in the story. But the whole purpose of reading with a lens is to slow down and do a close reading. So sometimes you really do have to kind of remind yourself what you're doing and force yourself to start looking for the kinds of details that you set out to look for with whatever lens that you chose. And again, in my case, I was looking for the character's thoughts. And so you'll notice I posted my chart and my chapter reflection as a document with this video. And so you'll notice that after I finished the chapter, I went back through and I typed into my chart word for word all of these sentences that I underlined in purple. And one of the things that you'll notice about the language of characters' thoughts is that the thoughts often use words like, it sounds like a question, like maybe I should go, or I wondered, or I'd completely forgotten, or I sincerely hoped, I remembered. The more I thought about, I suppose she didn't think anyone. She seemed, I hadn't realized, I hadn't known. Had I missed something? I never wanted. Okay, so you have to really pay attention to what thoughts sound like when you're reading so that you can catch all of them. And remember, when people say things, their dialogue is put in quotation marks. So if you're only trying to pay attention to what the characters is thinking, you don't want to underline stuff that is in quotation marks because that's what they say out loud, and that's not, that's their speech, that's not their thought. Okay, so make sure you can know the difference between what characters say and what characters think, and try to focus on one kind of detail at a time. All right, so when you look at my chart, what you're going to see is on the left-hand side, I copied down word for word those sentences that I underlined in purple because those were all the details that I found that showed the character thinking. And then after I got them typed in, I just looked at them, I studied them, and I tried to figure out which ones were similar, which ones connected, which ones sound like they went together. And so I highlighted some of those, and there were a couple different patterns that I noticed. One is that Ezra in this chapter, he's the main character, he's really comparing his pre-accident life with his post-accident life still, and he's been doing that since the beginning of the book, and so this chapter he continues to do that. In this chapter he goes a little bit further in analyzing his friendships, the people that he was friends with before the accident and the people that he's becoming friends with since the accident. So he's really kind of digging into the differences between those two friend groups and social groups, because his old group was the popular crowd, and his new group is the nerd crowd. And he's trying to figure out, where does he fit in? So that's a pattern that I noticed. And you'll see that I highlighted those details in green on my chart. If you want to do that, if it helps you find a pattern by highlighting some of the details that fit together, that go together, that sound the same, that seem to be about the same thing, the same idea, that might help you recognize a pattern. And so on the right-hand side of my chart, I wrote that down. I said he's analyzing friendships and social groups, and he's questioning which group he belongs to. Another pattern that I noticed in this chapter is that he thinks about his friend Cassidy a lot. I think he's developing a crush on her. So in a lot of his thoughts this chapter, he was upset about making her mad, and he was feeling connected to her. But I didn't talk about Cassidy in my chapter reflection. I decided that what I was going to focus on in my chapter reflection was the pattern about Ezra analyzing his two friend groups, the popular group and the nerd group. And you can read my chapter reflection, and what I really tried to stay focused on was one idea about how Ezra was in the middle of these two groups, and he's coming to terms with how fake his old friends were and how real and authentic these new people are, and he never even considered that before. And I think he's realizing that he was pretty shallow. So I talked about how one of the big ideas in this chapter seems to be maturity, and I showed how I figured that out by looking at Ezra's thoughts. So in your chapter reflection, you're always trying to write about the patterns that you see, and you're trying to figure out why that pattern exists, and what does that pattern help you understand about the character on a much deeper level. How can you analyze that character's thoughts and behaviors? Okay, because remember, we're trying to work through that reading ritual where you pick a lens, you read with that lens, and you notice details. Then you study the details and you try to figure out patterns. Which details are connected and how are they connected? What makes them similar? And then you write about those patterns. How do those patterns help you understand that chapter on a deeper level? Okay, so that's why we're trying to move away from plot summary. We're trying to figure out why the book was written. What's the big idea? How does the character develop, and what does that character development teach us about life? So I want you to take a look at my chart, and I want you to make sure that on the left-hand side you're writing down word-for-word details that you find by using the lens that you chose. In my case, it was the character's thoughts. And then I want you to study those patterns, study those details, and figure out what patterns exist, which details connect, which ones are similar, which ones sound the same, and how do they connect. And once you figure out how they connect, that's the pattern. And then in your reflection, you write about that one pattern. You can write about a couple different patterns, but it's better to focus in on one of the most important patterns that you noticed. Okay, so try to evaluate your details and write about the most important pattern that you found in whatever chapter you read. Okay, so keep coming back to this video and taking a look at it and getting the instructions for doing the chapter reflections, and study mine as a mentor. Take a look at my chart and what the details look like and what the patterns look like, and look at what I highlighted, and read my chapter reflection to see how I made sense of those patterns, because that's the whole goal. How can you make sense of those patterns? Dig a little deeper.